I showed up to my wife's Lavish company branch opening party, only to see everyone laughing and staring at me. The 1-minute man in bed is here. Then my wife's office lover called security and said, "Get this impotent man out of here." So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 70% company share, $97 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 56 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. I stepped into the gleaming foyer of the branch opening in my perfectly pressed navy suit, heart pounding like a drumbeat against my ribs. In my hand, I held a small, neatly wrapped box, just a token of pride and support for Mira. I'd helped build this company from the ground up, pouring my evenings into balance sheets and lending her the quiet confidence she wore on magazine covers. I hadn't been on the guest list, but I'd arranged surprise proposals, secured investors, even negotiated the lease for this very space. Tonight was meant to be her moment. I was the surprise. The music in the hall sputtered and died the moment I crossed the threshold, as though every cord had been rewound. A hush swept over the crowd, and then laughter exploded like shattering glass. My skin prickled. Someone, one of her new team members, I guessed, yelled, "Look who's here, the 1-minute man in bed." A roar of cruel delight followed that jibe. My gift slipped in my hand. I caught it before the paper tore, but the tremor in my fingers spread to my elbows and knees. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. Mira stood at the head of the ballroom, in front of a backdrop emblazoned with her name and the company logo. Her gaze flicked to me for an instant. Hurt, shock, something unreadable, then cut away as if I didn't exist. My breath hitched. A flicker of desperation urged me to speak, to salvage the moment, to demand respect. But I didn't. I watched her shoulders tighten, the way she held the microphone as though it were a shield. Dorian, her office lover, stepped forward from the side, lips curving into a triumphant smirk. "Security," he said, loud enough that everyone could hear. "Get this impotent man out of here." The reverberation of his command kicked me in the gut. I felt the weight of every person's stare, 100 pairs of eyes like needles pinning me to the polished marble floor. In that instant, I understood how completely I had vanished from her world. I was no partner, no equal, just a stain on her perfect evening. 2 burly security guards materialized at my elbows. Their hands were firm on my arms, fingers wrapped in gloves that were colder than steel. They steered me forward, away from the crowd's murmurs and chuckles, past rows of white-draped tables and crystal chandeliers. Every step took me farther from the man I had been. The quiet keeper of spreadsheets and midnight coffee runs, the one who built office systems while she cultivated her personal brand. In a twisted irony, I realized the only role I was allowed now was the invisible outsider. I didn't resist. What could I say? "I'm hurt. I love you." The words felt as hollow as the applause that greeted her speech once I'd been led away. I gave one backward glance at the throng of supporters and investors gathered under soft floodlights, their expressions ranging from awkward embarrassment to gleeful satisfaction. Myra's face shone in the spotlight. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this public disavowal with Dorian, plotted the timing so the announcement and the insult would land together like a hammer. Outside, the cool night air slapped me awake. On the steps of the venue, I paused, still in my suit and tie, the gift clutched as tightly as a lifeline. Lights from the street lamps splintered across the pavement, but they offered no clarity, only harsh illumination of the boxed present, now a symbol of my failure. I breathed in the cold, tasting resentment and disbelief. My jaw ached from holding back the retort I never voiced. Shame wove through me like a bitter perfume. I shuffled down the sidewalk, my shoes clicking in rhythm with my heartbeat. The city felt indifferent to my humiliation. Cars hurried by. Couples strolled arm in arm. Neon signs flickered announcements of convenience stores and cafes. Each step peeled away another layer of my composure until all that remained was a hollow echo of disappointment. I hadn't even argued when they ushered me out. Pride and grief warred for dominance inside me, but neither could break free. By the time I reached the curb, I realized I was still holding the gift. The wrapping paper was intact, but the ribbon lay twisted and uneven. I sank onto a low stone wall, sliding down until I was perched at its edge. The package rested in my lap, a small bright promise that felt meaningless now. I stared at the little bow, at the neat edges of the box, wondering if I should toss it into the gutter or hold on to it like proof that I still cared. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, but not with Myra's name on the screen. Just a string of business notifications, reminders that my own company files awaited my attention. A text from an investor popped up. "Congrats on tonight's launch, Mira," followed by a smiling emoji. I let the phone slip from my hand, the screen lighting up the asphalt before the device skidded to a stop. I didn't chase it. I sat there, silent and still, feeling the weight of that cruel phrase echoing in my mind. 1 minute man. The insult stung, but it wasn't only about sex. It was about worth, about power, but most devastatingly, about love. They had stripped me of my dignity in front of everyone who mattered to her. I closed my eyes and felt the ache of rejection slide between my ribs, nestling there like a shard of glass. I wasn't angry yet. I was too stunned. I lifted the gift and held it against my chest, as if it might protect me from the truth, that in her brand new world, I no longer had a place. I sank onto the cold bench outside the gleaming branch opening, the neatly wrapped gift still resting in my lap like a fragile promise I couldn't deliver. Streetlights spilled pools of amber across the pavement, casting long, wavering shadows that flickered like ghosts of every memory I'd built with Mira. My shoulders slumped, and the weight of that small box felt heavier than any burden I'd carried for the company. I traced the edge of the ribbon with a fingertip, imagining how she might have unfurled it, cracked open the paper, and found the delicate bracelet inside, a simple silver link engraved with her initials. Instead, I sat alone, the night air crisp against my skin, and listened to the silence of a phone that ought to be buzzing with her apology. My phone did buzz, but not with her name. The screen lit up with a string of automated notifications, stock reports, reminders of upcoming board meetings, half-read emails from investors. None bore the warmth of her voice or the familiarity of a heartfelt text. I stared at the blank space where her reply should have been and felt the ache of betrayal twist in my gut. The laughter from inside the event still echoed in my ears. Harsh, triumphant, dismissive. Impotent man, they'd called me. It wasn't merely a taunt about my body. It was a declaration that I was useless, invisible, unworthy of the life we'd shared. The knowledge cut deeper than any insult I could have hurled at them. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the early days, when Mira and I were a team united by vision and trust. I remembered late nights scattered across spreadsheets, her soft laughter drifting through the home office as she drafted marketing copy. I'd proofread while she sketched logos, offering quiet encouragement when she doubted her own brilliance. I financed our first lease, secured the series of seed investments, negotiated vendor discounts for her prototypes. Every crucial corner of that company bore my fingerprints, though the public face belonged to her. In her speeches, she'd extolled the virtues of innovation, the spirit of entrepreneurship, never once acknowledging the silent architect behind the scenes, me. It wasn't resentment I felt in that moment on the bench. It was grief. The grief of realizing that every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night spent securing lines of credit, had been taken for granted. I pictured the unopened gift tucked away somewhere inside that building, lying neglected on a satin cloth or a mahogany desk, as she basked in applause atop her platform. Anger flickered at the edges of my thoughts, but it was cold and distant. What warmed my chest was determination. I couldn't force her to open that box, but I could open a new chapter for myself, one in which my worth wasn't tied to someone else's validation. I exhaled, and a plume of breath drifted into the night. I pressed the gift against my heart, closed my fingers around it, and felt its reassuring solidity. The ribbon slipped through my grasp as I untied it, the paper glinting silver under the lamplight. My first instinct was to peek inside, to reclaim the moment I'd lost. But I paused, looking up at the building's darkened facade through the glass walls, no longer a place I could call home. The gift was hers to open, not mine to force. With a decisive motion, I gathered the wrapping and tossed it to the ground. The rustle of paper felt like a liberation. Then I held the box aloft for a moment, as if offering it back to the night, and slipped it into my coat pocket. The promise it embodied was mine to reframe, no longer a testament to pride in her accomplishments, but a reminder of everything I was capable of achieving on my own. My phone buzzed again, another email, another alert. I swiped through the messages with deliberate calm, pausing only to delete the ones bearing Myra's name in sender fields. In their place, I started typing a new note to myself. Remember your value. You built this. The words appeared on the screen like a mantra, steady and unyielding. I stood and brushed off my suit jacket, the crisp navy fabric no longer feeling like armor against shame, but rather a reminder of who I'd been and who I could become. The city's hum softened at my back as I took a step away from the bench. My path lay forward, not back to that building or the mocking eyes within. I felt the steady thrum of purpose pulse through my veins, stronger than any insult or humiliation. As I walked, the unopened gift nestled against my chest beneath my jacket. I realized that the true power lay not in exposing someone else's wrongdoing, but in reclaiming my dignity on my own terms. No longer the silent supporter, I would become the architect of my own destiny. Mira could keep her empty stage. I was heading toward a future where respect wasn't borrowed. It was earned through action and integrity. By the time I turned the corner onto the quieter street, the gift no longer weighed me down. Instead, it reminded me that kindness endured beyond rejection, that generosity could flow in every direction. I pocketed my phone, squared my shoulders against the night breeze, and began to carve out a new narrative, one where I would claim the applause that had always been rightfully mine. I returned home that evening with the gift still tucked in my coat pocket, a silent testament to the pride I once felt. The streetlights flickered as I climbed the steps to our front door, and each creak in the old wood underfoot echoed the fractures in my life. Inside, the apartment was dark and empty, save for the cold glow of the city skyline through the curtains. I set the gift on the coffee table, then moved to my desk where a neat, unassuming folder lay waiting, the one I had kept meticulously updated over the years. I flipped on the lamp and opened the folder to the first page, a printed invoice from our earliest days, dated nearly a decade ago. The currency conversion rate was scribbled in the margin, and my handwriting marked the cost of licensing fees I'd negotiated on Myra's behalf. I traced the faint pencil strokes, recalling how I had offered my savings to fund her vision when no bank would lend us a dime. My chest tightened at the memory of handing over that down payment, barely daring to hope it would become more than a gamble. I rifled through the stack. Wire transfer confirmations, digital prints of bank statements showing six-figure amounts wired from my personal account into the company's operating fund, emails with heads of wealth management praising my credit line. 70% of the capital had come from me. I remembered the late nights huddled in coffee shops, counting the dwindling funds, calculating whether we could afford another round of prototype tests. Mira had been our public face, but I was the scaffolding holding her performance aloft. Each document I pulled from the folder carried its own story. There were copies of the convertible notes I co-signed, the promissory notes I drafted to secure short-term loans, spreadsheets I built to track burn rates. I even found the insurance policies I arranged to cover product liability, dedicating hours to negotiating premiums so that our fragile startup wouldn't crumble under legal scrutiny. I flipped through every page, feeling the weight of my contributions accumulate like layers of sediment, each sheet a sedimentation of my sweat and faith. Then I reached the tax filings. My name appeared on every K-1 distribution statement, my social security number entwined with the company's EIN. I recalled the meeting when I had insisted we file as an S-corporation to maximize her personal brand's tax efficiencies, the arguments we had about dollars saved versus dollars earned. Mira had waved away my concerns, trusting me to handle the minutiae while she dazzled investors on stage. Now it struck me how invisible I had been in her success story. I closed the folder gently and opened my laptop. A blank spreadsheet waited for me, columns labeled date, description, amount, account, notes. I began entering figures. The $250,000 seed round I funded, the $1. 2 million Series A wire I initiated after negotiating a valuation I deemed fair, the $500,000 bridge loan I underwrote when investors balked. As I typed each line, the numbers formed a ledger of my devotion, a ledger that should have warranted respect but instead became ammunition for public humiliation. A new folder lay beside me, its flap fresh and crisp. On it, I printed a bold label. Final. The word felt good on my tongue, heavy with promise. I reassured myself that this folder would mark a turning point. I poured another cup of coffee and spread the chart printouts on the desk, arranging them into stacks by year. There was a certain poetry in seeing the trajectory of commitment drawn in bar graphs and pie charts, a visual testament to every sleepless night and every penny risked. I paused and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered like a constellation of opportunities yet undiscovered. The receipts and invoices were more than proof of loan agreements. They were proof of my capacity to create, to endure, to build. They reminded me that my worth was not measured by applause, but by the integrity of my actions. My throat tightened with gratitude for the experience, even as it trembled with the sting of betrayal. With deliberate care, I placed each document into the new folder, my fingers brushing embossed labels and printed ink. When the last sheet slid inside, I snapped it shut. It was compact, but it contained the sum of my partnership in the company that had turned its back on me. I laid the final folder atop the original one, as though stacking the old chapters beneath this new resolution. I leaned back in my chair, clutching the folder to my chest. A slow, sure sense of calm washed over me. I realized that the humiliation I had endured could fuel my next chapter. The receipts were a weapon not of vengeance, but of self-assertion, a reminder that I possessed the skills, the capital, and the tenacity to begin again. The gift on the coffee table caught my eye. I rose and retrieved it, lifting the ribbon to inspect the box. For a moment, I considered tossing it aside in anger, but instead I placed it gently into the final folder, as though sealing my past kindness within the ledger of my future resolve. I shut off the lamp and closed my laptop. In the hush of the apartment, I heard my own heartbeat, steady and resolute. The folder lay on the desk like the blueprint of my next move, the unspoken contract with myself to reclaim agency and dignity. I stepped away from the desk, pausing for a final glance. Tomorrow, I would begin executing the strategy outlined within these pages. Tonight, however, I simply breathed the quiet thrill of purpose, knowing that my silence would speak louder than any shout. That night, I sat alone at my home office desk, the glow of multiple screens illuminating my face as if spotlighting a stage I'd reclaimed. Silence reigned in the apartment, broken only by the rhythmic whir of the computer's fans and the soft click of my keyboard. I opened the secure credentials file I'd maintained since the company's inception, logins for finance portals, vendor management platforms, travel booking sites, even the private blockchain node where our equity controls resided. My heart thrummed, each beat echoing a mix of trepidation and steely resolve. This was my moment to act, to translate my quiet fury into decisive steps that would dismantle the empire built on my sacrifice. First, I navigated to the hotel accounts. The executive retreat in Aspen, slated for next month, was already fully booked. Luxury chalets, ski-in access, conference rooms overlooking snow-dusted pines. I clicked through the itinerary details and selected Cancel Reservation. A cascade of automated prompts confirmed my authority. The system displayed a polite apology notice, promising full refunds. I let out a small breath, tasting the bitterness of reprisal mingled with the sweetness of justice. No more would they toast champagne in my name while mocking the man who funded every reservation. Next, I turned to the vendor contracts. I accessed the procurement portal and located the executive lounge renovation at their flagship headquarters. Marble flooring, custom cabinetry, a sculptural reception desk. I marked the contract, terminate, then sent the official notice. At the same moment, I canceled 3 catering agreements for the gala dinners, stopped payment authorizations for the branded swag shipments, and retracted our commitment to a 5-year audiovisual service contract. Each cancellation triggered an email, terse notifications that didn't know the full story. I pictured the panic that would ripple through her team when they realized their polished events and white-glove services had been yanked away, leaving bare walls and empty plate carts. With the operational cutbacks in motion, I shifted to shareholder rights. I opened the equity management dashboard, where the cap table glowed with the distribution of shares. Mira owned a significant portion, Dorian a smaller slice, and I held the largest block. I activated the emergency freeze function, a feature I'd insisted upon during the company's founding precisely for moments like this. Instantly, the $97 million funding pool under my control locked down. All pending fund disbursements halted. Venture capital deposits remained in limbo. A confirmation dialog appeared. Funding pool successfully frozen. I stared at those words, feeling the thrill of power surge through me as though I'd pulled the lever on a giant vault door. I leaned back in my chair, fingertips brushing the cool metal of my desk lamp. My reflection in the dark window looked different. Eyes more focused, shoulders less weighed by doubt. I considered the dawn's board meeting, when news of the freeze would spread like wildfire. I imagined Myra's face when she realized the capital she'd trumpeted in press releases was now locked away, inaccessible. I imagined Dorian's bravado fading when he saw his own compensation and expense accounts suspended. I had been invisible for too long. Now I would be undeniable. Still in the glow of my victory, I drafted a concise notification to the board, signed with my formal digital signature. Effective immediately, pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Shareholders Agreement, I am exercising my right to freeze the designated funding pool. Further details available upon request. I didn't gloat, didn't elaborate. The words were enough. Any board member worth their salt would know what came next. Emergency calls, crisis meetings, reputations on the line. I saved the email as a draft. I would send it at sunrise, timing it to coincide with the open of business in New York. I shut down the travel and procurement tabs and reopened the company's main financial portal. I reviewed the cash flow statements. Lines of credit formerly drawn by Myra's legal name, balances earmarked for marketing campaigns, payment schedules for influencer partnerships, all now pending authorization from a cold, unyielding freeze. I printed out a summary sheet for my lawyer, planning to deliver it first thing in the morning. My lawyer had been waiting in the wings, ready to advise should I choose to enforce my rights. Now, thanks to the digital breadcrumbs I'd left, the path was clear. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a long exhale, leaning back so far the chair creaked in protest. The apartment felt warmer, more mine. The air carried the faint scent of my coffee, now cold. I stood, stretched my arms overhead, and felt the tension drain from my spine. In that moment, I recognized the magnitude of what I'd done, seized control, asserted my stake, and sent a message that silence, yes, my trademark silence, could be louder than any public outcry. At the edge of my desk lay the final folder from the night before, containing every invoice and wire transfer I'd ever made. I reached out, placed a hand on its textured cover, and tapped it gently. It felt solid, like the foundation beneath my feet. I would move forward with this document as both armor and blueprint. Before leaving the office, I retrieved my phone and composed a brief text to Marla, Myra's assistant. Morning. You and I need to talk. I didn't elaborate. She would sense the gravity. Then I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, heading toward the bedroom. As I crawled under the sheets, fatigue washed over me in heavy waves. Yet beneath the exhaustion, excitement shimmered. I had disrupted their world at the very core. I had reclaimed agency over my own life and finances. Tomorrow would bring chaos for them, but for me, a calm dawn of autonomy. I drifted to sleep with the hum of the city outside my window, a lullaby to accompany a man unbowed, unbroken, and ready to forge his own destiny. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, painting soft gold stripes across the rumpled sheets. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the distant hum of traffic below and the faint click of a hallway door. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, but I already knew what awaited me. An avalanche of missed calls and messages that would shatter the precarious calm I'd carved for myself. I steeled my resolve and sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. My suit jacket hung on a chair beside the desk. I shrugged into it, the fabric snug against my shoulders, and patted the inside pocket where I kept a copy of the board notification. From here onward, everything would happen on my terms. I reached for the phone. 56 missed calls glared at me, a retrospective on the chaos I'd unleashed. Mira, Dorian, Marla, my lawyer, and even a handful of numbers I didn't recognize. Name after name insisted on explanations. A string of voicemails ran longer than I cared to listen, pleading apologies, stammering questions, frantic promises. I let the screen settle on the voicemail list and tapped delete. Each press felt like another step away from the man they thought they could break. I returned to the message list and began deleting texts, emails from investors demanding conference calls, push notifications from project management platforms spamming urgent alerts, social media pings from colleagues tagged in crisis threads. I didn't intend to hide. I intended to choose my moment to respond. For now, silence remained my strongest statement. I rose and made my way to the minibar. The plush carpet whispered under my feet as I poured a glass of water and took a deep swallow. With my reflection in the mirror, dark circles under my eyes, expression calm but hawk-like, I felt something shift inside me. The faceless majority of my life had been reduced to panic-stricken pleas. Now the world would bend to meet the consequences of its own arrogance. Just then, my lawyer's name popped up. I answered. "They've seen it," I said, voice steady. "Funds are frozen. Aspen retreat canceled. Lounge renovations terminated. Who's next?" He inhaled sharply. "Board's convening an emergency meeting at 9. Mira is calling a special session of investors this afternoon. They're scrambling to find liquidity." I let the silence stretch. Good. Minutes later, another call came through Marla. She'd never sounded so tentative. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice cracking. "Everyone's in meltdown." "I'm fine," I replied. "Meet me in the lobby in 30. She hesitated. "What do you want?" "Answers." I hung up without another word. I showered quickly, the hot water washing away the residue of sleepless nights more effectively than any shampoo. In the mirror, I studied my face, marked by determination. By the time I stepped into the lobby, I wore not just a suit, but the armor of conviction. Marlo waited by the front desk, her eyes red-rimmed, makeup smudged in places. She straightened when she saw me, lips parting in a silent question. I offered a small nod and steered her toward the seating area. Plush armchairs faced a low table strewn with business magazines. I sat. She perched on the edge of the chair opposite me, hands twisting in her lap. "Marla," I began, voice low but clear. "Why didn't you stand up for me? When Dorian ordered security to haul me out, you let it happen." Her gaze dropped. "I'm sorry. I felt powerless. Dorian threatened to fire me if I did anything. Mira made it worse by not saying a word. You did nothing." I leaned forward. "You saw the look on her face. You saw the gutting of everything I built. You stayed silent." Her eyes met mine, brimming. "I know. I was scared. But I'm scared now, too. The board's in an uproar. Investors are threatening to pull out. Dorian doesn't know numbers. He never has. And Mira, she's lost control." A slow satisfaction spread across me. "Good." She blinked. "What are you going to do?" I closed my eyes, picturing the spreadsheet summaries in the final folder, the invoices, the wire transfers, proof in my own hand that I had been the company's backbone. "We're going to create a bridge loan," I said. "I'll authorize a $20 million interim facility to keep them afloat until they find new financing. But there are conditions." Marla's shoulders tensed. "What conditions?" I opened my eyes. "First, Mira steps down as CEO. She can take an advisory role, but no operational control. Second, Dorian's contract is terminated. He'll leave with a negotiated severance. Third, the board composition changes. I get 2 seats, including the chair of the audit committee. And fourth, we bring in an independent financial controller, someone with no ties to the old regime." She gasped. That's drastic." "It's necessary," I said. "They humiliated me publicly. They erased my contributions. They can't be trusted with my money unless they agree to these terms." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'll tell them." I rose and offered a hand. "Thank you, Marla. You're doing the right thing." She nodded, accepting my hand. "I always believed in you," she whispered. "I just never knew how to show it." In that moment, compassion softened the sharp edges of my resolve. I squeezed her hand. "Then show it now." She stood and walked back toward the front desk, shoulders squared. I watched her go, then turned to the windows overlooking the street. The city moved on, unaware of the shifting power dynamics inside this hotel. Soon, every executive in that building would be reading my terms, scrambling to preserve their own positions. I returned to my room and poured another glass of water. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my lawyer. Draft agreement attached. Sign and return to counsel. I scanned the document. Lines of text laid out my conditions, my demands, my assertions of rightful authority. I signed in the signature block with a flourish. Then I took a deep breath, feeling the promise of renewal in every cell. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, banishing the shadows. I had initiated the fallout. Now I would oversee the settlement. The balance of power had shifted, and no one would mistake my silence for surrender again. I finished my water, pocketed the phone and the signed agreement, and stepped toward the door. Today, they would negotiate with the man they tried to humiliate. Today, I reclaimed not only my money, but my dignity and my future. And as I opened the door and walked into the hall, I carried with me the quiet certainty that I would never again be invisible in a world I helped create. The knock at the door came just after dinner, sharp against the hush of the hotel corridor. I'd been reviewing the latest draft of the bridge loan agreement, ensuring every clause protected my interests, when I heard it, 3 deliberate raps that echoed through the quiet hallway. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected anyone but Marla or my lawyer to seek me out so soon. When I opened the door, the corridor's golden light framed Myra's silhouette. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands escaping like tendrils around a storm cloud. She wore no makeup, and the puffiness around her eyes spoke of tears shed long before this moment. She began, her voice trembling, unsure, forfeiting the composed eloquence she once wielded on stage. I stepped aside and gestured toward the room, though my posture remained rigid. She crossed the threshold as though it were a tightrope, each step measured, uncertain. She paused in the center, gaze flitting around the minimalist decor as though expecting surprises or traps. I closed the door behind her. The foyer light cast her in soft relief, illuminating both her vulnerability and my resolve. I watched her swallow, her Adam's apple bobbing. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said finally, voice small. The accusation and the apology tangled together, raw and half-formed. I said nothing, instead closing the distance between us in 3 strides and dropping my briefcase onto the sofa. It landed with a thud that underscored the gravity of our new reality. She took a step back, eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it." The words felt thin, like an umbrella in a hurricane. I folded my arms, mouth a hard line. "You didn't try," I said. "You let them treat me like a stranger in my own marriage." Her lips trembled. She raised a hand as if to touch my arm, then paused. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I felt helpless. Dorian, he had all the pull. He made everything glamorous and exciting. When he told security to throw you out, I couldn't move." I closed my eyes, recalling the flush of embarrassment at the party, the cold grip of the guards, the hush that followed. My chest ached with the old wound. "Shame is only powerful if you let it stay inside you," I said. "You hid your shame behind my silence." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was dependent on you," she confessed. "I built my brand on your labor. I used your money, your expertise, your name. And then I was terrified of losing it all if I spoke up." Silence stretched between us, taut as a drawn bow. I studied her, every quiver of her lip, every flicker in her eyes, and realized I'd never seen her so exposed. The public persona had crumbled, revealing the woman beneath, flawed, regretful, desperate for redemption. Yet even in her vulnerability, I found no comfort. "I erased you," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "I erased the man who held up my world." I exhaled, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "You erased me in front of everyone I cared about," I replied. "That cuts deeper than any company account freeze." Her gaze dropped to the carpet. She seemed to shrink within the space, as though she wished to disappear. Then she lifted her head, resolve kindling in her eyes. "I want to fix this," she said, voice steadier. "I'll sign your agreement. I'll step down. I'll do whatever it takes." My mind replayed the clauses I'd drafted, repayment schedules, board seats, severance for Dorian, her resignation. Everything I'd demanded to protect my money and my dignity. I considered telling her there was more, an apology that went beyond legal documents, an admission that trust would take time to rebuild. But I didn't. Instead, I let her words hang in the air like an offering. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But this isn't about just signing papers." I folded my arms again, though the rigidity in my chest softened slightly. "It's about acknowledging what happened. In here. I placed a hand over my heart, then let it rest by my side. You need to understand the consequences of your choices, not just the financial fallout. Tears welled again. She took a hesitant step forward. I do understand, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I lost you. I lost everything that mattered. And her voice broke, but she pressed on. I will live with that. I watched her inhale, as though drawing courage from the silent room. In that moment, I recognized the hardest part. Mercy. Justice had been served by freezing funds and restructuring the board. But mercy would come from acknowledging the truth between us and deciding whether to build something new or leave the ruins behind. I sighed, the sound soft and weighted. I'll send over the revised agreement tomorrow, I said. It will include a clause about a public statement, something to acknowledge the truth of what happened, so the world can see more than just the headlines. She nodded, determination tempered with humility. I'll do it, she promised. We stood in silence again, two figures in a quiet room, separated by trust broken and perhaps beginning to mend. I realized then that this was more than a negotiation of dollars and board seats. It was the reckoning of a relationship built on unspoken debts and silent sacrifices. She pressed her fingers together, tears glimmering in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said again, softer this time. For everything. I took a measured breath, the weight of my anger and the sting of her apology settling into a fragile drift. I know, I replied. Now let's see what comes next. She offered me a small, tentative smile, a gesture that felt like the first flicker of dawn after a long night. I returned it with a nod. Then, without another word, I turned toward the desk where the folder labeled Final lay waiting, and she followed me. Together, we stood at the precipice of an uncertain future, one we would have to chart without the safety net of silence. When I walked back into the company offices the next morning, the familiar hum of printers and ringing phones had been replaced by an uneasy silence. The lobby's polished marble floor reflected a scene of quiet abandonment. Half of the reception chairs lay empty, and the display cases that once held gleaming product prototypes stood empty or dusty. I carried my briefcase in one hand and the final folder in the other, each step echoing against the walls in a way that underscored how thoroughly the landscape had changed. My arrival prompted glances from a handful of remaining staff members, their expressions flickering between relief and trepidation. I nodded once, acknowledging the tension that hung over the place like a thick curtain. Upstairs, I found Marla sitting at her desk, drumming her fingers against the mahogany surface. When our eyes met, relief washed over her features. She rose to her feet, clutching a single sheet of paper. He's here, she said softly, nodding toward the glass-walled boardroom. Dorian is waiting. The others are in the next room. I thanked her and entered the boardroom, where a circle of uncomfortable chairs faced a broad conference table. Mira sat at the head, looking small in an oversized blazer, her hair pulled into the same bun she'd worn at the hotel. Dorian stood by the window, arms crossed, but his usual smirk was gone. He seemed hollowed out, as though he knew his position was untenable. A handful of executives clustered in the far corner, whispering with furrowed brows. Investors lingered by the door, watching me like predators evaluating whether to strike. I placed the final folder on the table, its weight a silent reminder of every investment I'd made and every sacrifice I'd endured. Then I opened my laptop and projected the summary I'd prepared, a concise breakdown of capital contributions, a timeline of cancellations, and the terms of the bridge loan agreement. The slide that detailed Dorian's termination stayed on screen longest, the text stark against the white background. I looked up at him. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Mira cleared her throat, voice wavering. We've reviewed your proposal, she began, and we're prepared to comply. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. No one expected her to concede so fully. She glanced at me, eyes pleading forgiveness. I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. I will sign the repayment agreement in full, with the bonus you specified. Dorian's contract will be terminated with the agreed severance. I accept your seats on the board and the audit committee, and I understand we'll appoint an independent financial controller. As she spoke, I observed each reaction. Relief softened some faces, while others froze in indignation. Investors scribbled notes. Legal counsel leaned in to whisper with Marla. Dorian's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the floor. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a flicker of something unexpected, sorrow for the ruinous path we'd taken. When she finished, I stood and closed my laptop. "Thank you," I said simply. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. This isn't just about restoring operations. It's about acknowledging accountability for the humiliation I endured, for the structure I provided, for the trust that was broken. I met Myra's eyes. "Your apology is on record, and your actions will honor it." A board member cleared his throat. "What is your plan moving forward?" he asked, voice cautious. I opened the final folder and handed him a printed roadmap, 3 pages outlining the restructuring timeline, milestones for fundraising, and benchmarks for executive performance. "We'll stabilize liquidity through the bridge loan, then pursue a Series B with new investors who align with our vision," I explained. "We'll streamline operations, reduce overhead, and rebuild staff morale through transparent leadership. The independent controller will audit past expenditures and recommend best practices. We'll institute quarterly reviews for executive conduct to ensure accountability." Questions followed about projected revenues, marketing budgets, product roadmaps, but I answered each with clarity, drawing on the deep knowledge I'd accumulated over years of silent stewardship. With every response, I felt the cushion of respect grow beneath me. It was a far cry from the moment I'd been escorted out by security. Now I commanded the room. When the meeting adjourned, Mira approached me as others scattered toward their offices. She offered me a small envelope. "This is a letter," she said softly. "I asked Marla to give it to you." I opened it and withdrew a single sheet of heavy parchment. Her handwriting was looped and precise, the ink still damp with intention. I read, "You were the frame to every photo. I hung them up and forgot who held them together. I am sorry for letting you become invisible." I felt the words settle into my chest like a warm ember. I folded the letter and placed it in my jacket pocket. Myra's eyes brimmed. "I know it doesn't fix everything," she whispered, "but it's the truth." I nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. Then I turned toward the door, folder in hand. Investors and executives paused to offer tentative handshakes and polite nods. I accepted each greeting with a calm smile, feeling the weight of my isolation lift with every introduction. Passing Dorian, I held out my hand. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine. For a moment, I saw regret in those dark depths. He took my hand, and our grip was brief but honest. "Thank you," he mouthed, no sound escaping his lips. Outside the boardroom, I inhaled deeply, the recycled office air tasting sweeter now that we'd confronted the past. The halls felt alive again, as though the company had exhaled after a long nightmare. Staff members re-emerged from corners, some offering shy smiles, others nodding in respect. Marla caught my eye and gave a small thumbs up. Her loyalty had endured through fear, and now it shone in her quiet confidence. I paused at the reception desk and watched the prototype displays, a new line of wearable tech humming with potential. In that moment, I realized that the true reckoning wasn't simply the money I reclaimed or the board seats I secured. It was the restoration of integrity. We had stripped away the facade and discovered that beneath it lay purpose and promise. I straightened my jacket and continued down the hallway toward my former office, the final folder pressed against my side as though it were a compass guiding my way. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with negotiations and deadlines and the occasional echo of past betrayals. But I also knew that, for the first time in a long while, I was steering the ship rather than following in its wake. And as the office doors slid closed behind me, I felt the quiet triumph of a man reclaimed, no longer a forgotten supporter, but a visible architect of his own destiny. 2 weeks later, I found myself at the threshold of Soul Weave's modest office, a converted storefront with brick walls painted in warm neutrals, string lights overhead, and a single sign declaring Soul Weave, weaving solutions together. It was a far cry from the marble lobbies and glass towers I'd left behind, but something in its simplicity called to me. I carried a manila envelope tucked under my arm. Inside, the investment agreement I designed to give this small startup the runway it deserved. I stepped inside, the gentle hiss of the door announcing my arrival. A woman looked up from a cluster of soldering irons and circuit boards on a workbench. She paused, eyes widening in recognition. "Is that?" she began, voice catching. It is. You're the guy from Nexera, right? The one they humiliated. I offered a small smile. That's me. I extended the envelope. I'd like to invest. She blinked, uncertainty flickering across her features before melting into gratitude. I don't know what to say. I gestured to the chair behind me. Just sit. Tell me where you need support. She slid into the seat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm Ava, she said, voice soft but firm. I've been working on sustainable fiber synthesis, plant-based polymers that mimic spider silk. I pitched it to Mira and her team years ago. They laughed it off as a hobby project, said it didn't fit their brand narrative. I kept going alone, cobbling together equipment, teaching myself structural modeling on nights and weekends. I nodded. Persistence pays. I placed the envelope on the table. This will cover your next 18 months of R&D, equipment upgrades, and pilot manufacturing. Her eyes filled with tears. You're giving me everything I asked for years ago. I'm giving you what you earned, I said. Your idea had legs. I regretted not supporting it before. Ava exhaled, relief evident in her slumped shoulders. She opened the envelope and skimmed the agreement. Terms fair, no hidden clauses, interest rates designed to foster growth rather than extract profit. When she looked up, her smile lit the room brighter than the overhead lights. Thank you, she said simply. I leaned back, watching her unfold the possibilities before her. I'd like to be a silent partner, I added. I'll advise when needed, but this is your vision. She nodded, conviction shining in her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next hour, we talked shop, polymer matrices, supply chain challenges, pilot batch targets. She showed me prototypes, fine threads that glinted in the afternoon sun, strong enough to support weight but soft to the touch. I held one strand between my fingers, feeling the tensile strength she had coaxed from humble plant matter. It was remarkable. When our meeting ended, Ava walked me to the door. She paused in the entrance, turning back. You okay? She asked, as though testing whether I belonged in this world of startups and scrappy entrepreneurs. I looked around at her workspace, tools neatly arranged, whiteboards covered in formulas, a stack of journals containing her experimental data. More than okay, I said. I feel alive. She smiled, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in weeks, untainted by fear or obligation, born of gratitude and shared purpose. I slipped out into the street, the sun warm on my back. I felt lighter than I had in months, no longer tethered to the ruins of the old company, but propelled forward by the promise of something new. Over the next several days, I checked in on Solweave's progress. Ava sent weekly updates. Images of new reactor prototypes, video clips of fiber strength tests, notes on regulatory filings. Each email carried an undercurrent of excitement, reminding me of the thrill I once felt helping build Myra's company. But here, every success was shared, every challenge met with collaborative problem-solving rather than ego-driven directives. One morning, I walked into Ava's lab unannounced. She looked up from the microscope and grinned. Hey, you, she said. I was just about to run fiber alignment tests. Want to see? I nodded eagerly. She invited me to a workbench where a small spool of fiber awaited. She threaded it through a digital tensiometer and with a flourish pressed start. The device hummed, measuring tensile strength as the fiber stretched. The readout climbed higher than previous tests. Ava raised her eyebrows in triumph. That's over 1.2 gigapascals, she said. Stronger than steel. I whistled softly. You've done it. She looked at me, pride shining in her eyes. We did it. Her use of we resonated deep within me. I realized that I was no longer the isolated financier or the sidelined husband. We were partners, collaborators. I smiled, feeling the warmth of true camaraderie. That evening, as I walked back to my studio apartment, I reflected on how different this felt from my life with Mira. There were no boardrooms, no orchestrated presentations, no empty applause. There was only purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of shared achievement. I pulled out my phone and drafted a text to Marla, who'd become one of my few confidants, invested in Solweave. It feels right. I pressed send and slipped the phone into my pocket. The city lights flickered on around me, but they no longer represented the hollow glamour of a world that had rejected me. Instead, each one was a beacon, a reminder that there were untold stories waiting for someone to believe in them. And as I strolled through the neighborhood, I understood that I wasn't just escaping Myra's world. I was weaving a new one, thread by thread, powered by integrity, respect, and the unwavering belief that true success is built together. I glanced down at my phone as I stepped into the modest cafe, the worn leather case feeling warmer against my palm than any boardroom's polished countertop. Mira was already seated at a small, round table by the window, the morning light catching the gold flecks in her coffee and the tear tracks still faint on her cheeks. I lowered myself into the chair opposite her, setting the briefcase between us like a barrier I intended to keep sturdy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The bustle of baristas and the hiss of espresso machines filled the space, but around our table everything felt hushed, as though time had paused to witness this meeting. Mira reached out and folded her hands on the table, fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me here," she said, voice steadier than I would have expected. I nodded and retrieved the legal papers from my briefcase, their crisp pages outlining the repayment terms for the $97 million I'd frozen. The ink was still fresh. I slid the documents across to her, watching them land with a soft flutter. "These are the final terms," I said. $97 million plus a 10% bonus, to be repaid over the next 2 years, interest-free. You step down, relinquish your equity and operational control, and I receive the board chair position. She picked up the top sheet and ran her fingertip along the signature line. Her gaze flicked up at me, meeting my eyes with an intensity that reminded me of early days when we'd shared a single laptop and a single dream. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll sign." She paused, pen poised like a reluctant bird about to take flight. "But before I do, I need to say something more." I leaned back, maintaining my stillness as she took a breath. "I don't expect this to fix everything," she said, voice soft but determined. "I know I destroyed your trust, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know that I finally see the cost of my ambition. I lost sight of who you are and what you gave me. I hung the pictures of our success on the wall and forgot who built the frame." Her words landed in my chest like a fist wrapped in velvet. I felt the tension loosen slightly, though I kept my expression unreadable. "Your apology is noted," I said. "What matters now is action. The world needs to know the truth." She nodded and slid the repayment and resignation papers toward me, signing them with controlled strokes. Then she reached into her purse and withdrew another document, a short public statement, drafted on my instructions. It read, "To our community, I acknowledge that I relied on my husband's unwavering support and unfounded sacrifices to propel this company forward. I apologize for the harm caused by my silence and mistreatment. I stepped down to make amends and ensure transparency moving forward." Mira handed me the signed letter, her hand lingering on the edge of the table. "Will you release these tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I'll publish at 8 a.m. Eastern." The clatter of cups and the murmur of conversation around us resumed its normal rhythm, and the moment of stillness faded. We both looked out the window, watching pedestrians pass along the street, oblivious to the seismic shift our agreement would trigger. She folded her hands again. "I don't know who I am without the title," she confessed, voice fragile. "But I want to learn." I studied her, bruised but resolute, humbled yet hopeful. "Then learn," I said. "Take responsibility. Find a new purpose. I'll withdraw my support for extending operations in your direction, and you can forge your path from scratch." She nodded, tears welling once more, and offered a faint smile. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with gratitude. I remained silent, allowing the weight of our exchange to settle between us. The cafe's atmosphere felt lighter now, as though honesty had lifted a cloud. I stood, gathering the signed papers and my briefcase. As I walked away, I heard her call my name. I paused, turned, and she mouthed, "Good luck." I offered a curt nod and stepped into the sunlight of a future no longer defined by shared illusions, but by the clarity of truth and the promise of new beginnings. I moved into my new studio apartment the day I finalized the last of the company documents, 10 feet by 12, with a window overlooking a brick courtyard. The air felt different here, lighter, as though it carried room to breathe rather than the stale heaviness of boardroom politics. There were no receptionists to impress, No assistants to fetch coffee, just blank walls waiting for me to leave my mark. I carried in a single cardboard box containing essentials: a laptop, notebooks, my favorite fountain pen, and the silver bracelet I'd meant to gift Mira. I placed the box on the hardwood floor, paused, and then set it aside unopened. I unpacked slowly, arranging books on a shelf, rolling out my yoga mat, hanging a handful of abstract prints I'd picked up at flea markets. Each task felt grounding, a reminder that life continued beyond spreadsheets and shareholder votes. I made coffee on a small hot plate, the aroma filling the room in comforting swirls. As I sipped from a chipped mug, I glanced out the window at the courtyard below: potted plants, wrought iron chairs, and a stray cat weaving through the shadows. It felt like an actual home. In the days that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with stretching and journaling. I tracked daily wins and challenges, setting intentions rather than ticking off endless to-do lists. I spent afternoons meeting with entrepreneurs at local cafes, offering mentorship on financial planning and growth strategies. Their gratitude was genuine and unguarded. No hidden agendas, just people striving to turn ideas into reality. I felt my pulse quicken with each "thank you" and each spark of hope in their eyes. One afternoon, I attended a workshop on social impact investing. The organizer introduced me to a network of investors focused on clean energy, social housing, and educational startups. Their values aligned with mine, profit intertwined with purpose. I spoke passionately about SoulWeave's sustainable polymers and offered insights from my own experiences. A woman in the back, her name tag reading Naomi, approached me afterward. She ran a venture fund that backed female founders in emerging markets. "We need someone with your integrity," she said, handing me her card. "Let's talk." That evening, I returned to my studio, heart alight with possibility. I brewed tea and opened my laptop, drafting an email to Naomi outlining potential collaborations. The silver bracelet sat on the desk beside me, a relic of a past chapter. I reached out, touched the cool metal, and slid it into a drawer. Some gifts are better held for oneself, as reminders of lessons learned rather than unfulfilled promises. News of Myra's empty office filtered to me via a brief text from Marla, photo attached. "Your gift still sits on her desk." I clicked the image. The dark mahogany desk gleamed under soft overhead lights, the unopened box positioned near the center. I stared at it, but the urge to respond vanished. Instead, I tapped a quick reply. No reply needed. That night, I dreamed of boardrooms dissolving into open fields, of colleagues transformed into curious students, and of a man unbound by titles. I woke before dawn, heart steady, and slipped on running shoes. I jogged through the silent streets, the city's pulse a low hum beneath my feet. When I returned, sweat cooling on my skin, I poured water into a glass and sat by the window. The apartment felt alive with fresh possibilities. Over the next weeks, I balanced mentoring sessions with new investment discussions. I listened more than I spoke, asking questions that helped others find their own solutions. I learned as much from them as I shared. Each connection reinforced the belief that success is not measured in headlines or high-rise offices, but in the
One
impact
morning,
you inspire. An envelope arrived at my door, a letter from Mira. My hand hesitated before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the same gold-flecked paper she once used for press announcements. Her handwriting was smaller now, unhurried. She wrote that the company had reorganized under new leadership, that she was exploring philanthropic work, and that she hoped, someday, we could reconnect without the weight of past mistakes. She closed with, "I wish you peace." I folded the letter and placed it beside the drawer where the bracelet rested. I didn't reply. In that moment, I recognized that closure can come without closure, acceptance without reconciliation. I stood, walked to the drawer, and slid it closed. The studio was quiet but full, every corner reflecting the man I'd become. I poured another cup of coffee, settled into my favorite chair, and opened my laptop. On the screen, an email draft to Naomi awaited. I typed a subject line: collaboration opportunity. Below, I began outlining ideas for a joint fund to support social enterprises. My fingers moved with purpose, guided by experience and tempered by humility. And so I continued, no longer the silent supporter in the shadows, but but a visible architect of positive change. The world had forgotten me once, but in rediscovering myself, I realized that I never needed their applause to prove my worth. My conviction, integrity, and quiet determination were applause enough. Tonight, as streetlights flickered on and the city settled into darkness, I felt genuinely at home in my own skin and ready for whatever came next.